Charlton Athletic had been around the block, literally. They'd had their glory days in black and white, they'd even made a resurgence back to the top flight, but amid turmoil surrounding their home of the Valley, 1991, Alan Curbishley turns up, unites the club, changes it, revolutionises it you might say, creating the glory years of Charlton Athletic.
Just saved it! And Charlton are promoted!
The best ideas are usually formulated in a row of terraced housing. These days it's to have an extra one of those special brownies. Back in the early 1900s it was to form Charlton Athletic. South London, the dictionary definition of a footballing hotbed now, had just seen its only professional club piss off up to the other end of the capital when Woolwich Arsenal deserted the land. July 1920, Charlton Athletic finally apply to join the Southern League and make inroads into claiming the area for themselves. A year later they'd get elected to a now expanded football league entering in at the 3rd Division South. 13,000 souls crammed into the Valley for Charlton's first Football League game, a 1-0 win over Exeter City, courtesy of a Tommy Dowling goal. 2 years later they almost made a name for themselves in the Cup, rattling off such scalps as Manchester City, Preston North End and West Bromwich Albion. These were top class teams but unfortunately they'd be eventually eliminated by the eventual winners, Bolton, at the quarter-final stage. This FA Cup of course won in Wembley's first ever final, refereed by a white horse I think, if I've got the information from the textbooks correct. The first whiff of Charlton's more transient nature to their history followed in their attempted relocation to Catford. They'd lost a shit ton of money, returned to the Valley and would learn to live with those itchy feet. Alex McFarlane was the manager in these days, of which there were many ups and downs, from having to go cap in hand to be re-elected in 1926 to the Scots' return 2 years later and their immediate promotion to the 2nd Division. They held their own for a bit before suffering relegation in 1933. It was supposed to be a disaster, but instead the seeds of growth were planted, quite literally, since Jimmy Seed was their new manager. For the next 23 years, Seed blossomed into a wonderful tree that sprouted into the top division off the back of successive promotions in the mid-30s. I'm only skimming through this because his time at the club deserves his own video. First there came a title challenge in Charlton's first ever top flight season, then, despite World War II and, like most sequels, it ramped up the stakes, but it didn't cull Athletic's momentum. Upon the FA Cup's resumption, Charlton found themselves in the final, taking Derby County all the way to extra time, before flopping to a 4-1 loss. Not to worry, they were back exactly 12 months later, turning that silver into gold. Burnley the opponents this time, the depths of extra time plumbed once again, and Chris Dovey it was with the winner. You'll notice a bit of theme with this club, but once a managerial dynasty was wrapped up in 1956, with Charlton's time in the top flight now well into its 3rd decade, the club quickly deteriorated. Jimmy Seed resigned owing to ill health at the start of the 1956-57 campaign. The club failed to enact Seed's wishes of handing the job to former Charlton player Benny Fenton, and the club were relegated later that season. They wouldn't be back for quite some time. As football radically changed with the abolition of the maximum wage and the modern day giants of English football were being formed, Charlton spent the entirety of the 60s in the 2nd Division, barely keeping their heads afloat. Not even a kit change to all white helped. Weird that. By 1972 they were back in the 3rd tier before embarking on a yo-yo aesthetic for the remainder of the decade. Then, 82, Lenny Lawrence arrives, grabs the club by the scruff of its neck. This was a club almost wholly reliant on fees being garnered for talent like Mike Flanagan and Derek Hales. Also bands like The who drew 75,000 to the Valley in 76. Managing the band, Bill Curbishley, who had a little brother called Alan, who could be found selling the band's t-shirts. He'll become much more important later on. The 80s meant the continued yo-yo in between divisions, and whilst in the hot seat there would be stability for once in Lawrence, that wouldn't translate itself to the boardroom. As Mark Hoyler became chairman in 82, he had grand plans which included breaking the bank for Barcelona Ballon d'Or winner Alan Simonson. It'd be like Charlton signing Luka Modric today. With 16 appearances to his name, you could say that the Dane cost the club 20 grand each time he stepped out onto the pitch. Hardly sound financial footing as inland revenue were ominously knocking at the door. To which Charlton stuck their fingers in their ears and whistled an innocuous tune. For once, the next death knell wasn't actually their fault. The Football League binned off shared gate receipts, and it was a measure that was only going to harm the smaller clubs with smaller stadia, Charlton being one of those. Debts ticked over into £1 million, matches were postponed, words like consortium and administration were being chucked about like confetti, and finally, on October the 5th, 1985, the straw that broke the camel's back for many, Charlton Athletic played their first match as tenants at Sellers Park. And despite it all, this is how the season ended. Without words, you'd be forgiven that this was a bane for the blood exercise. Well, it partly was, to the board anyway, but because of the promotion that draw secured, it was largely one of celebration. In what should have been a period of celebration was one where the club was shunted from pillar to post, from Sellers Park to Upton Park as the valley continued to rot away. Charlton effectively sofa surfing their way through the late 80s.
It's great and it's still in that penalty area. Stewart. Oh, it's a goal for Charlton Athletic.
A deep 1-2 towards Hartford, who's won it. Danny Wilson.
Bruce with a header. Good save by Boulder and turned in by Ballister.
Just like that, Charlton's top-flight existence was snuffed out. When it was obvious that Lenny Lawrence couldn't return to the club to the top tier ahead of the Premier League's formation in 1992, he left for Middlesbrough and Charlton were forced to change direction. T-shirt seller himself, Alan Curbishley, who had been signed by Charlton in 1984 and re-signed merely 12 months prior, was named alongside fellow former player Steve Gritt, who had also been recently re-signed. Both were promoted, Curbishley from first-team coach, Gritt from the reserves. There had been news before they even arrived, however, that things were finally taking a turn for the better. April the 2nd, 1991 was the date when a planning meeting decided by 17 votes to 1 that Charlton Athletic could finally return to the Valley. As of yet, we have yet to find out who the little bollocks was that voted against it.
Offside, the cross comes in, the header comes in, off the bar, against Boulder saves, but there it is.
Up in 34 minutes and they're under pressure again here inside their own penalty area. Oh, Watson keeps it out on the line. He did superbly. It's gone in now though.
Despite a lack of money, a lack of players and the club holding the joint managers' player registrations just in case, the team that would come to be nicknamed the Addicts nearly mounted a late playoff push. Sadly, 7th was just one win shy of the eventually promoted Blackburn Rovers.
Forward, looking for Leeburn. Leeburn holding off Simons. Now for Pitcher, and now for Colin Walsh. Yes, it's the goal! It's the goal that the Charlton fans have waited for 7 years.
Let's welcome football onto the stage, now officially allowed to start since it was 1992, and from Charlton's mid-table position, it wasn't that much of a significant campaign on the pitch, but it was one of their more important seasons off it. For one, the game we've just shown you, a scrappy 1-0 win over Portsmouth on a bitterly cold December, unimportant for what happened on the turf, but crucial because it marked Charlton's return to the Valley. Financially, the club were in comparative rude health. The sales of Rob Lee and Anthony Barnes topped £1 million, helping to pay off the HMRC. Meanwhile, the Valley investment plan added a further £1 million to what people disgustingly refer to as the kitty. How were Charlton doing in the actual football on the turf though? Well, in 1994 they'd matched the 11th place from the prior season before slinking back into the bottom half without much of a regression points-wise on the pitch, i.e. mid-table as fuck. Still, it was all worth what was transpiring around the white-lined green. The Valley was being dredged into the 21st century with multi-million-pound renovations. Games like going up to Old Trafford for a cup quarter final and sales like Scott Mintos for nearly £1 million even ticked the club into something called a profit. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Profit. The youth team was also bearing fruit. Lee Bowyer heading a special class of 1994 whilst the scouting finger was on the pulse, the acquisition of defender Richard Rufus following. It was all going so well, too well you might suggest, so Charlton sacked Steve Gritt and stuck Alan Curbishley in sole charge. In what had been a rare bout of joint managers actually working in the game, it was a surprising pivot from a club not entirely guaranteed of its second tier status yet. Curbishley held off offers for Rufus and managed to bring in Les Reed as first team coach. Then, only then, were they at the races.
Buckle. Charlton sub Kim Grant hit the post, but Gary Nelson followed up. Carl Lieben was the demolition man, sticking out his long legs for his first.
Robinson's in the middle, and Robson's, a wonderful goal!
Charlton promptly began the season by shitting the bed away to West Brom before embarking on swaves of unbeaten matches, only for more in advance of Christmas, which rendered them tightly packed into the top half, split by just 6 points. It was the Addicts' fast start to 96, inclusive of 4 goals stuck beyond both Birmingham and West Brom, which ensured that their simply horrendous form in concluding the regular season was still enough to earn them a spot in the top 6. Based on what I think is head-to-head record, who knows, Charlton finished behind Leicester and were handled local rivals Crystal Palace instead of Stoke City for the upcoming playoffs.
Well, with him, here's Robinson, and now Matt Jackson on loan from...
Oh my goodness, and it's a goal!
Nadar gets to that one.
Friedman getting in behind them, and good save there. But in the end...
Corner for Crystal Palace. Nadar trying an overhead.
Plays the ball nicely for Nadar, and still Nadar, a chance now. Can Houghton finish it off? It's there, Ray Houghton.
Charlton were consigned to the Football League once again, their heads only above the surface financially because of a £3 million sale of Lee Bowyer to Leeds United. You'd have thought that the increasingly moneyed Premier League would be imperative the more the 90s wore on. Instead,
a little too much so. Sent off for his challenge on Darren Eadie, the Addicts were first a man down and then a goal down. Neil Adams cracking direct strike and struck back almost immediately, another free kick and the exact same spot. A different player took the free kick, but the result was the same. The crowd were contemplating a quiet pint away from all this excitement. The scores were once again level. 2-2 at the break then, but with Charlton down to 10 men, the defence was always going to be stretched, and Adams with the resultant penalty. Darren Eadie got his second and Norwich's fourth, but this game had a sting in the tail. Jason Lee got Charlton back into it at 4. Came on as a sub and equalised to make it 4-4. Final score, Charlton 4, Norwich 4.
Yeah, you're right, I did just take the most goal-hungry fixture from Charlton's otherwise boring-ass middle-of-the-road season that they were calling the 96-97 campaign and plonked it bang into the middle of this video. Spoiler, it won't be the last 4-4 draw you see today. It was a strange old campaign. Rugby League tried and failed to set roots down at the Valley. Also, QPR nearly got their grubby little paws on Alan Curbishley. Neither panned out as expected. One dented the coffers, one would eventually bolster them. Whilst Lee Bowyer had been the headline departure, key names were beginning to trickle through into the club. Mark Kinsella joining from Colchester as his replacement for 150 grand. Grimsby's Clive Mendonca was acquired up front before Paul Konchesky and Scott Parker continued to be nurtured through the ranks and into the first team. Meanwhile, in net, Sasa Ilic had been signed. It made for the beginnings of a team. After a loss at Portman Road in March 1998, Charlton appeared to be locked into a playoff spot, 6 points behind the Automatics and 5 ahead of 7th place. From their remaining 10 matches, only 4 points were dropped. On the final day, only a point could be gained from Birmingham, where 3 could have marked automatic promotion. Nonetheless, Middlesbrough could not be caught and the Addicts were transported into the playoffs, this time with the second leg home advantage over Ipswich Town.
Gave Charlton a precious lead to take into the second leg at the Valley next Wednesday. But there was...
Piece of play from Newton, tiptoes through the defence and scores a wonder goal!
Another nerve-shredding playoff campaign. This time Charlton were on the correct side of a semi-final triumph, therefore they would be posted at Wembley for the first time in half a century. Meeting them there, Sunderland, and perhaps the greatest ever game to be played at the National Stadium.
Two, but Mendonca's clear. Clive Mendonca! Someone being the taker. Quintana! Is clear. Kevin Phillips! Mendonca's in the clear. Chance for Clive Mendonca! Cross, and Quinn wins it. Niall Quinn! Perez has come again. The header! Somerby! Inside the penalty area. Good cross. Mendonca! Ilic has saved it! And Charlton are promoted!
Promotion had become a financial imperative. Such had become their desperation to go up. Charlton now operated at a £2 million annual loss, in spite of the Valley taking in a bolstered average attendance. Now they had to stay there, and Curbishley would have to do so without Les Reed, who returned to the FA to manage club academies nationwide.
Wasn't. Hesitation on the ball allowed the impressive John Robinson to seize his time. Neil Redfern cashing in on Jones's parry. 2-0. Dave Jones' expression summed up Southampton's day. Howe's first job, picking the ball out of the back of the net, prepared to pounce again. 4-0. It was becoming a rout. A beleaguered Saints defence, Mendonca in again for the easiest hat-trick he'll ever score.
Now this Premier League lark was a piss take, 5-0 to Southampton. Either side of some goalless draws at places like St James's Park and Highbury, the Addicts were staying up, despite their tag as relegation favourites. Talent was quick through the door, Chris Powell in defence and Neil Redfern in midfield. The team was better, they were coping well with a leap in opposition quality. Nothing could stop them now.
Leeds moved ahead 11 minutes before half-time with Jimmy Floyd-Hassel
making sure Everton left the Valley with a priceless victory.
It's a high ball to the back of the 6-yard box, the header down, move turns very well, left foot Charlton, a wonderful finish from...
Of course, except these defeats that I just showed you, which encapsulated the latter weeks of 1998. Charlton hadn't won a league game since their third Premier League triumph on October the 24th, and it wouldn't be until February when they claimed another 3 points in the league. Those 8 defeats on the spin turned what had been a mid-table start to be celebrated into one battle in relegation. Then across 12 February days, Charlton equalled their entirety of Premier League wins, again with a stern defence in dispatching of Wimbledon, Liverpool and Derby. Life was breathed back into the campaign, but yet still they had only a 2-point advantage over Coventry in the drop zone, and given Cov's history of fighting off relegation, they were a wounded beast to be feared. Even more so when the Addicts suddenly got addicted to not winning, claiming just 1 victory in their next 10 in the league. It left May the 8th at Villa Park as D-Day. A win was the only result needed to keep them alive in the division.
Well, he just waited. Rufus covering by, I don't know, and he's given out to Mendonca. And he's taken it beautifully. Here's Joachim. And it's the equaliser. He's done well, Mendonca! Good save! And it's in, surely, yes! Barry, then Ehiod, Kurazon, Joachim. There are 2 players on the line. Barnes, Mark Kinsella, Graham Stewart, and Danny Mills! Wonderful!
Back heel. This is Danny Sonner who can finish Charlton off. And may have just done that.
And with that, after a whirlwind 12 months, Charlton were back where they started. To balance the books, Danny Mills left on a club record fee, again to Leeds, whilst bargains were sourced in Dean Kiley and John Salako for the Addicts' assault on returning to the Premier League immediately.
17 minutes from time. That cross headed home by Richard Rufus. 3-2! I don't believe it! With Slasa Ilic replacing the international-bound Dean Kiley.
Christmas turkey was being devoured and Charlton had a pretty solid place in Division 1 midway through the first season, only 3 points back on the automatics and still with a game in hand. The club were ready in a share issue to make more money available ahead of what was predicted to be another stab at the Premiership. Then the Addicts won their next 11 in the league. With that, promotion effectively sealed at a stroke. Now they commanded a 13-point lead over Manchester City. Little over 5 weeks later, promotion was there to be grasped at home to Portsmouth on a Friday night in mid-April, only for a point to scupper it. The inevitable was delayed by less than 18 hours as results went the Addicts' way as they took their foot off the pedal, crowned champions by just the 2 points in the end. It was clear, however, that Charlton were a vastly more prepared club for a second go at life in the Premier League. They'd broken a club record points tally. Curbishley had won the Manager of the Year award ahead of names like the freshly knighted Sir Alex Ferguson. Whilst Clive Mendonca needed to retire owing to injury and a revamped North Stand burned a £9 million hole in club pockets, there were shrewd moves in the market that summer. Who knew Radiston Kishishev and Mark Fish would be so integral in defence, the pair costing less than £1 million. Then there were the more luxury buys from the continent in Jonathan Johansson and Klaus Jensen. A good start was important and they were handed feasibly the easiest opponent on paper, Manchester City, who had joined them in promotion.
Weaver's foot, and now Robinson, and Weaver's foot again, and a goal!
Came on to a hero's welcome and compounded Charlton's misery with 2 late goals.
The Brazilian, chance for 5.
But perhaps Charlton knew best that a stable start wasn't all that indicative of a successful fight against relegation, and whilst it was a more chaotic beginning to the campaign than the last in the Premier League, the Addicts had shown enough in August to say that they could stay the course this time.
By Stewart and fed through for Johansson, who scores for Charlton. And off Grimondi's head, Stewart. And by the man in full, Johnson for Powell. Oh, Bartlett. Svensson, can he keep it down? He can. He finds the corner.
There were no wild runs of triumph that overinflated the confidence, nor losing streaks to damage the confidence. It was a simple cut and thrust of Premier League football, their season best summed up by October and November. 1 won, 1 lost, and repeat, and so it continued. At their best, Charlton were a team that became hard to beat in the early stages of 2001, going from Boxing Day to mid-March without defeat in the league. At their worst, a petering out in the last 2 games, which arguably cost the club European football. Yes, this was 9th place in the top flight. Charlton supporters hadn't seen better since 1952. Alan Curbishley may as well have walked on the Thames, such was his reputation at the Valley. It's probably why West Ham came in for him when Harry Redknapp left Upton Park. But Curbs had only completed one part of the story.
Running in left back. Oh, they've scored! Captain's there again, looking this time for Ewell in the middle, and in behind him is Powell.
Jensen in support, there's Ewell in the middle. Bursting forward is Stewart, and here's Jason Ewell, and that's 2-1 Charlton.
Ewell loses the possession. Parker forward, this is Charlton's opportunity. Still Parker, can he finish? He can!
Charlton were able to maintain a stable squad over the next 2 seasons, improving their attack to the tune of Jason Ewell and Sean Bartlett, whilst bolstering the defence with the signings of Luke Young and Herman Hreidarsson. Although straightforward, boring mid-table finishes on the surface, Charlton had their chances to break through the glass ceiling and reach Europe in the early years of the 2000s. 01-02 saw famous wins at Highbury, Stamford Bridge and White Hart Lane, but a mix of injuries and poor form squashed the potential of European football coming to the Valley. The following campaign would probably be most renowned for that game at Stamford Bridge, reminiscent of beach football. Elsewhere though, more big scalps in Leeds and Liverpool. And yet once again the season imploded upon entry into the springtime. What had been a potentially serviceable top half finish became another bottom half campaign of nothing. By now, Scott Parker was beginning to receive overtures from around the country for his exploits in midfield. Curbishley only further bolstered that area of the pitch by adding Matt Holland, whilst Paolo Di Canio was signed on a free from West Ham up top. Parker's performance against Chelsea in December would come back to bite Charlton, the freshly minted London club coming in for him for £10 million.
Unusual start. Holland coming in from the opposite flank. And it's Matt Holland who turns Terry, turn back again, and Johansson. They lead by 3 goals. Here's Jason Ewell.
Charlton were at the giddy heights of 4th place and the potential of Champions League football as they entered February. Without Parker, however, Charlton won only 5 more games in the league, still finishing 7th, but it was becoming more than a trend that the Addicts would peter out the more a season wore on.
Hreidarsson. Good cross. Jeffers, yes! Luke Young with the cross. Oh, he had so much room! It's Bartlett again.
While some names were through the door, Danny Murphy, Dennis Rom, Alan Jerome Thomas to name most of them, Parker was joined by an increasing cast of departures, Klaus Jensen and Paolo Di Canio the most important. Then there were the ones who Charlton strived for but could not achieve, Tim Cahill and James Beattie, who preferred a move to Everton. Again, it was the same old story, the promise of Europe before a squelching into the mid-table. And let's get it straight, the fact that Charlton were even flirting with Europe in an age of the Big Four, and names like Villa, Everton, Spurs, Newcastle and Man City being strong, was a massive overachievement.
Oh, it's a great run and a very, very fine goal. Charlton
Plays it into the near post.
Oh, it is a superb goal by Luke Young.
Not even the goals of Darren Bent, a player who absolutely should have made the 2006 World Cup squad ahead of the prepubescent Theo Walcott, could help Charlton up the table. This time there wasn't even the threat of European football. Inconsistency reigned once again at the Valley, and this time 13th was the final resting place. If you had to label it, despite never once finishing in this position, it was somewhere that was familiar to Charlton, the median, home. Top half overachievement meet crippling mid-table inconsistencies, between 9th and 14th in the table, between 44 and 53 points. Then the news that fans dreaded, news which changed the club forever.
Alan Curbishley has decided to leave the Valley. The second longest serving Premiership manager had a contract until 2007 but decided it was right to call it a day.
Over the last couple of months, it's nothing to do with any outside influences whatsoever. I just felt it's the right time for the club to make a change.
We're visiting London this week in the tour of Britain, the playlist of which we've been so far is here. Go and watch.